I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon, part of Public Leadership Institute's Public Leadership webinar series. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about public leadership, talking specifically about some poll-tested methods to rally the public for activist government, and I'll set that up in just a second. This is an opportunity to not only gauge some the message skills, but to talk about it, how it links to a broader strategy as we think about ways to advance progressive political and policy change in our local communities, in our states, in our country. My name is Dave Woodward. I will be your host today. I am the National Network Director for Public Leadership Institute. In addition to my work with PLI, I'm also a county commissioner and a former state legislator, and will be I'm providing the tech support as we facilitate today's session. I'm going to give a quick little brief introduction about Public Leadership Institute and encourage people to check us out on the website and sign up and continue to receive updates on a number of projects that we're working on. PLI is a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy and leadership center that's really focused on raising public awareness around a host of key issues around equity and justice, and to work with public leaders to improve the economic and social conditions of all people across the country. And you can get more information about Public Leadership Institute at www.publicleadershipinstitute.org. If you go to the website, you're going to get a whole host of access to a host of materials that you can directly download, and projects that we're working on, and get a lot of information, and really encourage you to go to the website, grab those resources, use those resources, and join us in partnership to push forward a core set of ideas that we believe can help really move this country forward. Before I hand it over to our guest this afternoon, I just want to bring your attention to a couple things on your control panel. We really want these sessions to be as value-added as possible. To that end, we really like to bring your voice, if not actual voice, bring your thoughts directly into the conversation. There's a number of ways to do that. On your control panel, you should see a little hand icon, and at any time over the course of the presentation, you can click on that. And if you have audio capabilities, we'll be pausing periodically to allow for you to ask your questions directly of our host, our guest speaker today. I realize that people join us from a variety of locations, and sometimes the audio is not accessible, so you can type questions in the question bar, and we'll try to get through as many of those questions that we have time allowed. And you can also email me at dwoodward@publicleadershipinstitute.org. And I will try to either process those questions or inquiries during the course of today's presentation. If it's afterwards, you can definitely direct it to the appropriate person to answer your questions or get additional follow-up resources. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Bernie Horn. Bernie is the Senior Advisor for Public Leadership Institute, former policy director in his own rights, communications trainer, author of some of the publications I lifted up just recently. Bernie's with us today, and so Bernie, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Great. I'm going to get ready to hand over the presentation to you. And today's topic is poll-tested method to rally the public for an activist government. This really is one of those things that we automatically assume that Americans hate government, but it's just not true. As long as we as leaders stay away talking about government, this abstract, disconnected entity from our lives, and talk about how it can enforce fair rules, people move to our side and embrace our solution. And so really this becomes an opportunity. We're going to be talking about, the public embraces the right type of regulations, regulatory agencies to, create a fair world, a fair place, a fair economy, etc. And so without any further ado, Bernie, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Very good.
And you should have control there.
All right. Do you see that screen?
That's perfect.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dave. Today I'd really like your active participation Please signal Dave with questions anytime, and he'll jump in whenever it seems appropriate. Today, you are guinea pigs. This is the first time we've offered this very important presentation, and we're going to be giving this presentation many times across the country. So at the end of this webinar, please give us feedback to help us make it better. A word about our PLI website. Most of what I'll say is available in some form on the website, and also we will put these PowerPoint slides up on the website this afternoon or tomorrow, and then we'll email each of you the link to access the slides. So we're going to have an awful lot of polling information here. You don't have to write it down. We're going to make sure that you can download it, everything you want. Look at what else is available on the PLI site. Our progressive agenda covers a dozen issue topics and links to 200 model bills. Our playbook for abortion rights has 29 proactive abortion rights model bills for states and localities. Our messaging book, Voicing Our Values, gives practical advice for talking about dozens of issues. Our blog, Ideologue, and our regular reports, Progress in the States and Localities, and the Repo Rights Report, are designed to be practical and useful for state and local lawmakers and advocates. Look around and you'll find something that's useful for you, and it's all free. Politics is the art of persuasion. When we attempt to persuade, language matters. It makes a difference whether your audience listens for rational arguments or engages their emotions and turns you off. In the big picture, progressive policy requires an activist government. Conservatives want to get government out of certain areas, not abortion, but it's usually so the rich can make more money. Progressives want government to step in and ensure that every American has access to a level playing field and fundamental rights and protections. In our book, Voicing Our Values, which is available on our website, or you can buy a copy on Amazon, this is described as freedom, opportunity, and security for all. This presentation is divided into 3 parts. First, I'll talk about the problem as it's been perceived for years, that average Americans are very cynical about government, and that creates a major barrier to progressive policy. And I'll also offer some suggestions on how to handle the classic problem which still exists. And then I'm going to stop for questions. Second, I'll talk about some new Celinda Lake polling and how it changes our perception of the problem and gives us some new ways to talk about government regulation and enforcement. And then I'll stop again for questions. And then third, I'll go over how to use this polling information in states and localities and examples of language you can use. And then I'll stop for a third time for questions. Okay, so here we go. Demonizing government is a long-term conservative strategy, right? You know that. If they can get people to hate government, it seems that, or it seems like it to lawmakers, then they can stop progressive laws. And yes, asked in an abstract or generalized way, a lot of people don't like the word government. This is even more true of the word Washington or bureaucracy, which has always been an insult. So let's look at some polling to dig into it. This is the current political problem. Only 19% trust the federal government. Now, let me point out 2 things. The big drop from 60% to 19% there, it was 60% after 9/11. And when Obama took office as president, it was at 25%. So 35% of the drop occurred under George W. Bush's watch. That's where people overwhelmingly lost faith in government. And interestingly, that rise from 17% to 60% occurred on Bill Clinton's watch. People were more and more favorable toward government as Bill Clinton was president. Unfortunately, that's not going to help us a lot in 2016, but it sure is interesting. The bottom line right now is, as the Pew Center writes, a year ahead of the presidential election. The American public is deeply cynical about government, politics, and the nation's elected leaders in a way that has become quite familiar. So, no matter who caused it, we're stuck with the problem. Now, here's a classic poll question. And, looks bad. But I'd like you to note 2 points about this perceptions of government regulation. First of all, up until about the 2008 election, Americans favored regulation almost 2-to-1. And then, even now, it's about 50-50. But I want you to see something else about this. If you do it by party, it shows that something really happened among the Republican base. And this is, understand that people's fundamental beliefs don't change. This is the reaction to a smear campaign. Since the 2008 presidential campaign, there's been a concerted attack through Fox and the right-wing noise machine on the word regulation, as well as other words. The conservative media has partisanized issues that used to be bipartisan. I'll give you an example. Gun control or gun violence prevention. For many, many years, this was a bipartisan where Republicans and Democrats favored these provisions equally. In fact, Republicans used to be slightly more in favor of gun control than Democrats. And today, if you look at the words gun control, it's like this, where the Republicans have taken off against it. But if you ask the question, do you favor background checks for all handgun purchases, you'll see that both parties, or everyone really, overwhelmingly favors it, and the opinion about the particular policy hasn't changed in 20 years. So there's an attack on certain words. Obamacare is one of them. The point is that Americans' underlying beliefs are still there. These are just words that trigger certain Americans to think, oh, I was supposed to be against that. So they say, oh, I'm against regulation, but that doesn't mean that when you make it more real to them, that they continue to be against what we consider regulation. Also, it's become very, very much a gap between how people feel about federal and state and local governments. And the view of the federal government has attached itself very much to who is president. And that's not so true of state and local governments. You all in state and local governments are far more popular. And look at the difference from 1997 to the present. In state government, it's gone from 66 to 57%, which is not so bad. And in local government, it's gone from 68 to 63%, which is hardly any change at all. It's the federal government where there's been tremendous loss in favorability, not at the states and localities. So when you're talking about the state and local government, when you're talking about doing things there, you do not have nearly the problem that people who are talking about the federal government have. And here's another slide. This is from the Celinda Lake poll that I'll feature in a minute. People simply don't have the same problem with state government they have with the federal government. And although it's not in this poll, polls consistently show that local government is even more popular than state government. So there is a problem on the federal level. It's not so bad on the state and local level. But let's understand the problem at the federal level even more, because it's not really what people think. It's important to understand our audience. We can't persuade our fellow citizens without understanding what they are thinking. Americans think that the federal government in general, or in the abstract, is too corrupt, too partisan, too bloated, and too wasteful. But whatever the reason voters react that way, generalizations about the word government are based on biases and preconceptions that are just about impossible to erase in people's heads. The solution then is not to argue against those generalizations. So you can't push back by saying, oh, government is honest and frugal. That's not going to get you anywhere. We can't win that way. We can win with a different approach, which is a form of reframing. Now, here's where polling data gets interesting, where on the one hand, people hate government, we're told, but in fact, when asked whether government should play a major role, people are pretty strongly in favor of government. And you'll see that, some are more partisan than others, but Americans are pretty positive about specific actions by the federal government. This is federal government, the most unpopular. Similarly, if you're talking about budgets, if you ask people whether we should cut the budget across the board, like let's have a 5% cut, voters will pretty much say yes. But then when you ask them about specifics, should we be spending more or less or the same on specific government policies, progressive priorities do especially well. If you look at this chart, there's only one thing that people actually want to decrease more than actually that's not true. Every single one of them, they want to increase or stay the same. Only foreign aid is there a real movement against it, and that's based upon their ignorance of how much we actually give out in foreign aid. So this is a classic problem. Americans generally don't like government in theory, or think they don't like it in theory, but they like it very much in practice. And here's one more example of that. And this is very consistent with this theory versus practice thing. The conventional wisdom is people don't like federal regulatory agencies. Well, the conventional wisdom is simply wrong. Even the much maligned Environmental Protection Agency has a positive rating of 52%. And just as important, there is no more than 1/3 of voters, and this is really the conservative base, that has an unfavorable opinion of any of these agencies. Really, voters do not have a problem with federal regulatory agencies, period. It's just a certain number of the conservative base that, they think that's what they're supposed to say. These findings would stun a good number of pundits who believe that the criticism of these agencies has permeated the public, but it's really just the right-wing partisans who feel this way. So why do average voters feel positive toward these federal agencies? Again, it's because this is not an abstraction. This is not just government or Washington or bureaucracy. They don't like bureaucracy, but they like the EPA and the FDA. These agencies do real work that benefits real people, and Americans have a general idea that they do, and so they feel positive toward these organizations. And as our Celinda Lake poll shows, this is especially true when you tell stories about the need for government. So I've said abstraction is the absolute least persuasive way to talk about government. Specific policies or agencies are more persuasive, but the very most persuasive is to make the problem very real for your audience by telling stories or giving case studies like Flint, Michigan or West Texas, and then they really understand why we need an activist government. Now, I'm going to do 3 more slides, and then I'm going to pause for questions, and then we'll launch into the heart of the Celinda Lake poll. Here is our overall warning about message framing. Generally, political science is based on the assumption that people mostly act rationally, that their political opinions and the way they vote are based on self-interest, but that's not how reality works. Everyone carries in their heads a long list of pre-existing beliefs, stereotypes, and biases. This is true of Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And we all hold on to these beliefs despite self-interest and in the face of facts. Your listeners, consciously or unconsciously, are seeking out information that conforms to their pre-existing beliefs, while inside their minds, they ignore or refute information that seems to disprove these beliefs. It's a selective use of evidence in which they reinforce to themselves what they already think. This is called confirmation bias, and scientists have known about it for centuries. Sir Francis Bacon explained confirmation bias in 1620. There's a tremendous amount of scientific information and studies about confirmation bias. We like one in particular called Confirmation Bias, a Ubiquitous Phenomenon in Many Guises, which you can find a link on our website to see. But the point is, this is something you have to understand when you're trying to persuade people in politics, is that it is quite an effort to take people from where they are to where you want them to go without finding a place where you're in agreement, so that you get away from the confirmation bias. You get away from them reacting negatively to what you're saying, and they see you are in agreement, and then you can pull them to your side. Fortunately, people carry conflicting views about government in their heads. As we've said, Americans have a love-hate relationship with government. Our job is to trigger the beliefs already inside their brains that support activist government. We know people tend to dislike government in the abstract, but they like it when we get specific. The traditional advice is to avoid the sausage-making process and focus on the sausage. So that advice is still true. I'm going to take questions, and then we'll move to a poll that gives us a better understanding of how to trigger those pro-government images in people's heads and stay away from the anti-government images. So, Dave, I'm going to go to questions.
Sounds great. If people have any questions or even thoughts, reaction of anything that's been presented, you can click on the hand icon on the control panel, on your control panel of the GoToWebinar, or you can type questions in the question bar, and we'll try to get through as many as those. Now, one hand raised here, and this is from Tara. Hi, Tara. Are you there? Having some technical difficulties with Tara, so we'll come back to you, Tara. Got a question from Jim. Is like, are there trigger terms? And maybe you can just give like a prelude of, I think you're going to get to some of that, Bernie. The trigger terms that like elicit these responses. Like, what? I mean, can you give us a teaser?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Government, Washington, bureaucracy, or things like welfare will make people think in their minds of those negative stereotypes, and it's just automatic in their heads. So that's the kind of thing that we want to avoid. But it's not that hard to avoid, because you talk about what government does rather than the abstraction. And as we will see, I did not say regulation. I did not say don't say regulation, because it turns out regulation is not a bad word, much to everyone's surprise.
Well, particularly, I mean, you raised, I mean, the issue of Flint, Michigan, and I'm being based out of Michigan, that, and now it's an international story. I mean, the need of more regulation, or the indictment of lax regulation, is, I mean, fueling the intensity around that. Bernie, I have a question. I mean, particularly in this this presidential election season, and I think in that one of the first polls that you show like the partisan divide on that, and it definitely seems to be something that's red meat for conservative voters. I mean, the indictment of government, the blaming of government. I sometimes question them, why do all these people want to be in government? But but I mean, I guess in terms of the progressive candidates and kind of resonating to progressive um, voters. I mean, you don't seem the same type of like defense of. I mean, that's always the defense of government because I think you just, talked about why it's got to be talking about the solution. Um, but what do you think is holding back? A bigger, kind of more of a strategic response to these type of attacks by the right.
We have to get proactive, and I will get to that in the third section of this webinar. But basically, look at Bernie Sanders. He's pretty unapologetically proactive and pro-government. But it's not that he's running around saying, government is good or government can accomplish all these things. Instead, he's talking about what we can get, what we can as a society, improve. And it's this vision which works especially well when you tie it to enforcement of rules and regulations that attract people. It's that positive vision rather than trying to be defensive and saying, oh no, government isn't horrible, we should all appreciate government. You just go proactive with your message, as I will give examples.
And I think that response is, I think begins to answer, and I know you're going to be talking in the next couple sections, you're going to be talking about some of these things in greater detail. Toivo, I asked a question, can you give specific ways you think we can change the conversation around the buzzwords that you had outlined, and how do we work to be able to do that? And I think part of that is being proactive and developing these more effective proactive strategies to actually do that. And I know you're going to be talking about some more specific examples as we move forward. So if that's okay, we're going to punt on that question. And Bill posed a question characterizing, asking the question, how can one or three alternative meshes counteract what seemingly looks like the right's myopic, almost brainwashed message, negative propaganda, the indictment of government, etc. And I think you're going to actually outline some of those messages in the coming session.
Yeah, I know. But I understand the question, and that is, you have these people who are not reality-based, right? They're saying things that are not true, that seems crazy. And, what we wish is, how could we change their minds, or how can we move them into a reality-based politics? And the answer is, you can't really. And this is true of any issue or any political campaign, is there are people who are against you, and there are people who are for you, and all you can really do is to persuade the people who are persuadable and energize the people on your own side. You can't really persuade the people who are against you to change their minds because of confirmation bias. Whatever you say, they're going to think of a reason to not believe it. Like climate change or global warming. People believe that it doesn't exist despite evidence on top of evidence. They find ways to discount the truth. And that's just the way people are. That's how they think. It's a years and years long process to change people, which happened on same-sex marriage. It took years and years and years, but people did change their minds. But that's a rarity.
Right. Jim has another question that he's raising up, and are there, certain terms, phrases that, he writes telegraph or basically indicate that someone kind of comes in with this bias, the anti-view and government. He's more of a conservative frame. And this is, I think he's asking this question in the context of being able to kind of knowing your audience. So the question comes at you and having some sense of what's the predisposition that someone's at already to whether or not to engage in a persuadable approach or do you just write it off if they're an opponent?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you want to assume that anybody's persuadable until you see that they're not, but they, without giving exact language, which depends on the situation, I think that the conservative base has become so far from normal political language that you can catch them pretty quickly. You can hear them using right-wing rhetoric that they got from Fox News pretty quickly. So without giving examples, because there are so many, I'd say if you listen carefully, I think you can call them out soon and move on and focus your attention on the persuadable voters.
Right. And I guess I'd add also something that, based on what you're presenting, that, I mean, this vision of what can be, the vision of what should be, the vision of what people are, I mean, kind of meet them where they already are, is not something that's going to lose you support. So, I mean, it doesn't, you don't have a risk of losing persuadables. You don't have the risk of losing your base. So there isn't a lot of harm to actually being employing some of the message strategies that you're going to be outlining in the next session, which is the perfect segue to the next section.
Great. I agree. So let me make one thing clear, that the following is from Celinda Lake of Lake Research Partners, who is one of the very best pollsters in America. She was commissioned to do this work by the Bauman Foundation, who fund a lot of really great work, and I'm copying many of the Lake Research graphics directly. So I want to make sure and clear that they deserve the credit for all these charts and like. Now, instead of leaving you in suspense, I'm going to give you the conclusions of the research right up front so you can focus on the data that support it. This is new work. Americans support increased enforcement. Among many progressives, there was a perception that Americans were feeling that government is overreaching, that agencies like the EPA and the FDA are out of control and running amok and killing jobs, because that's the right-wing narrative. But it turns out that's emphatically not true. Americans want more enforcement, not less. The problem with enforcement is that it's not being applied fairly. People think that the rich and powerful can get away with whatever they want and that they can break the rules. That's what people think. They're right, and it's our job to stop it. This finding does not just apply to enforcement of laws and regulations currently on the books in a way that we would think of a law or regulation, because the voters don't really understand what's a law or what's a regulation or what's a new law or what's a new regulation or what's enforcement. It can be used to justify new laws and regulations. Understand that, Americans just don't know the difference between laws and regulations. They don't know the difference between stricter laws that are on the books and, improving laws that are already there. Anyway, I will show you specific narrative language that proves that this is a rather broad messaging tactic that's going to work for you in a lot of different ways. Now, here's the first real polling slide. People overwhelmingly like rules and regulations. Rules is stronger language than regulations or standards, but they all work. Voters are less favorable here on this question about the phrase enforcement of regulations. But it turns out in later questioning in the same poll that they say this here because people are reacting to their belief or knowledge that regulations aren't being enforced fairly. So they answered less favorably in this question, want more enforcement of regulations. This unfavorable is not because they don't favor enforcement of regulations, it's because they think it's not being enforced. And incidentally, Republicans and independents are slightly better. You get better results with rules than you do with regulations. But the point that I think is very interesting here is that it's basically 2-to-1 favorable to the word regulations. Now, who thought that that was the case? Certainly not the pundits in Washington. Regulation is not a bad word. So why are rules and regulations popular? Ironically, is because people are cynical about favoritism. In a way, it's their cynicism about government that makes them want government to be better, for regulations to be enforced. These are just a couple of the little quotes. There are many, many, many of them that were developed in focus groups. But basically, here the man says, it's like, if your company is rich enough, you can pollute anything you want as long as you pay the fine. That's how people are feeling. I can't say that he's wrong. That's why they like enforcement of rules, because they're looking for fundamental fairness and prevention and protection of people. So first, we're going to break it out into federal and state. Federal enforcement is popular. This is asking about enforcement of our national laws and regulations, a good thing or a bad thing. Good overwhelmingly, even among Republicans, overwhelmingly, in every geographic area, overwhelmingly. 71-14, that's a landslide. And that's the federal government. When we look at the state government, it's even stronger. So when you make this kind of argument in your state or local forum, and you're trying to argue for some kind of increased enforcement of regulations or laws in your own state or locality, people are overwhelmingly for you. This is just a slice of the conservative base that says that stricter enforcement is bad. I mean, that's amazing. Only 9% of Republicans on this slide say that it's bad. That's amazing. Then this asks, do people think that laws and regulations work? Despite conventional wisdom, a majority of voters are concerned that there's too little enforcement of laws, because here they say that that laws and regulations generally work. There is no feeling here that the federal government is out of control. Look at the Republicans. It's 2-1 that laws and regulations actually work. There's no indication that the right-wing messaging is getting them when you get specific. It's this specificity that gets you to how they're really feeling. And again, when asked whether there's too much enforcement of laws and regulations, these are federal, versus too little, people believe there's too little enforcement, especially with independents and Democrats and so forth. When asked if enforcement is not tough enough is a slightly different question. And I'm going to just do 3 more slides, and then I'm going to take questions again. So start thinking of your questions and write them in the little box there to Dave if you don't have voice capability. When given a 3-way choice, which does something different to people than a 2-way choice, and they're given the choice but whether enforcement is too tough, about right, or not tough enough, look what happens. Only 8 or 9% think that enforcement is too tough. Nearly half of voters believe that America's laws and regulations are not tough enough. And we're talking about federal laws and regulations, the least popular. So, when asked, about different words and phrases in order to find out what people think is wrong with enforcement of laws and regulations, this is where people are at. It is overwhelmingly that they're not equally applied or not fairly applied. This is the thing that's in people's minds, is that there are these rich people and powerful corporations that get out of complying with fair rules and regulations, whether that's environmental or employment or tax or whatever, they feel like there's this 1% or, this group other than themselves who don't have to follow the rules. And that's their biggest concern. Now, the second thing here is hurt small business. You have to understand that the phrase small business is special in American politics. It's like the phrase Main Street, and people adore small business. And when they think of small business, they're thinking of, the corner takeout store that's run by a family who's there all the time. They're thinking of businesses really small, like 5 or 10 people. And they don't want to hurt those people because they're friends and neighbors and they count on them and so forth. So naturally, whenever there's some new law or regulation, the conservatives put all their effort into saying, oh, you're going to hurt small business. But in fact, these laws and regulations hardly ever hurt small business. They are aimed at the biggest businesses. They're just kind of hiding because the biggest businesses aren't very popular. At any rate, you have to be concerned about small businesses. You have to be able to say it's not going to hurt them. There are other concerns that people may have about enforcing laws and regulations, which you just have to be ready to address. And then asked, what's the best word to describe enforcement? This is the last slide before the next opportunity to ask questions. The best word to describe enforcement, proper, common sense, fairer, more equal, tougher. Now, among these, tougher laws and regulations does the least well. But remember, we had a slide earlier that showed that tougher actually did quite well, and it does quite well here. But when given the choice, you're going to be a little stronger if you use the words proper regulation, common sense regulation, fair, more equal regulation, because that's what's really in people's hearts, not so much tougher. Somehow the word tougher takes off a slice of people because they picture in their minds something a little different than what you have in mind. So this is the second opportunity for questions. After this, I'm going to go through some specific narratives, how you say it, how you would talk about it, and how you would use stories, case studies, to make your most powerful argument.
And if folks have questions or comments, reaction, please type them in the question bar. Or better yet, if you have audio capabilities, you can click on the hand icon on your control panel, and I can unmute you and bring you into the conversation. Dan writes, and I think, that was my first reaction to his reaction to the tougher compared to the others, and he thought that tougher definitely, he believes, has value when it's regulation against things we don't like, and less when it's things that could to hurt things that are maybe good, like tougher on insurance regulation, tougher on the banks, good, tougher regulation on small business, less good. And I think it's probably, I think that there's probably something there.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Each of those groups that you're regulating has their own level of favorability. So that, for example, banks are very low, and in fact lower than the federal government.
And lawyers, I understand.
Yeah,
that's a new low.
If you're regulating some group that is unfavorable, yes, I think tougher works.
Probably works, right? All right, I got Carolyn's on here. So, Carolyn, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Carolyn, where are you calling us from?
Indiana.
Fantastic. Tough state.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering why people are living in Indiana. I was wondering why people are so favorable toward state government, but that's not my question. My question is, why don't we hear more in the presidential campaign? You know, we hear, well, a candidate proposes this policy and they'll never get it through Congress. But what the president can do is, you know, make sure the banks don't scam you and make sure your food's not contaminated and stuff. And why don't we hear more about that in the presidential campaign?
Great
That,
question,
you know,
Carolyn. Great, thank you.
I think that is a great question. And why doesn't President Obama and the administration crow about these things more? Why don't they go out and be more proactive? You know, obviously they are proactive, but I think they could do more. I think that Hillary could do more to you know, to talk about this and talk this way. I think that Sanders sort of is doing it. It's just that he has a particular area, you know, about attacking the rich and special interests and Wall Street and the banks and so forth, that it seems limited. But I think that he is. I think that he has a version of this that's working for him.
Great, thank you. Another question here from Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl, are you there? Oops. Looks like I lost Cheryl. She was there.
Here.
Oh, there you are, Cheryl. Hey, how are you?
Hey,
Where are you calling from?
hello.
Calling from?
This is Cheryl Kagan. I'm a state senator in Maryland. How are you, Bernie?
It's good to talk to you.
Hey, thanks. Great job. I missed the first few minutes, so perhaps you dealt with this already. Two questions. One is rules, regulations, laws, some of those words. Do you find differences between Democrats and Republicans? And the second question would be how much of this is transferable to those of us who are working at the state level?
Very good. So rules and regulations are both effective with Democrats and Republicans, surprisingly effective. However, rules work slightly better than regulations with Republicans. With Democrats, rules and regulations are the same thing. I'm sorry, what was the second again?
Oh, wait. She's unmuted. Ah, I lost her. 1 second. Wait. This is what happens when you get a lot of people on. Here, 1 second. There. Senator, are you there?
Am I back?
Yep, you're back.
Yes,
Hello?
yeah, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Um,
What was the second
okay.
question again?
That's right. I also threw in the word laws, and I wondered whether that was tested at all or what your intuition is about that in terms of rules and regs. And then the second question was about how much of this do you think would be applicable at the state level for those of us who work at the state or local level?
Right, of course. Yeah, laws was tested connected with enforcement. So enforcement of regulations, enforcement of laws. In both cases, they were wildly successful. Yes, I think that this is more applicable to people at the state level and the local level than it is to people on the federal level, because states start out with a more popular government. There is far less anti-government sentiment that is in people's heads to start with than the federal government. So the stereotypes and biases that work against people when they're saying, oh, the federal government should do this or that, it's not nearly the same thing when you're talking about state government. So this should all work considerably better for the state government than the federal.
Great. Got a question here from Bob that asking for a reaction to, recent President Obama using executive privilege, or seeing governors using executive privilege, and particularly in rulemaking, and issuing executive orders to move things forward. And it seems like a standard attack from the right is just to challenge his authority to do that, to challenge the ethics of using the powers granted to the executive offices to do those things. How do you reconcile that with the information that, as you presented, Bernie, that overwhelmingly shows that the public is, frankly, with President Obama, with, using the tools of government to protect people and improve people's lives?
Well, it is true that there is a segment that is attacking Obama and other people for using executive power, saying it's overreaching and so forth, but it's not being successful with the persuadables. It's only acting as a rallying cry for the right-wing base. They can work themselves into a lather, which is sort of entertaining for them. They're sort of enjoying working themselves into a lather. But this messaging is not working with persuadable voters, as we showed with the slide near the beginning, that voters actually don't have a problem with all those federal regulatory agencies. If they thought that there was a lot of overreaching, they would be unfavorable to the EPA and the FDA and so forth. But they just don't have a problem. They don't think that there is an overreach, except for people who are in the right-wing base and they've been worked up by Fox News and Rush Limbaugh and the like, and they sort of enjoy being worked up.
I think well answered. And the question actually made me also think about, Bernie, that probably one of the most recent use of executive power, President Obama's direction, is the expansion of the rule to allow overtime for higher wage earners. And what's kind of like my reaction, just thinking through this presentation, is that this is a real opportunity to put a lot of this language work in practice. And I hear almost no one talking about it. I hear in reports about it. I hear reports about the executive order and like this is the effect. I hear a response from Chamber of Commerce saying this is going to destroy America as we know it. But I don't hear public leaders really celebrating this new regulatory action that's going to improve the conditions of workers in across this country.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I think that that would be an excellent opportunity to use the language that I'm going to move to next, and I'll show you some narratives of how to use this language and how it fits into any number of issues that you might want to push. Yeah, they should have done it. It shouldn't be a debate over whether this is overreaching or not, or whatever the right wing wants to make it. Our side should proactively frame the debate and say, we are enforcing the rules and making them fairer, which is exactly what they're doing. I mean, it's literally true, so why not say it?
Right. Got a comment question from Teresa, and would you agree, and clearly a student of yours, Bernie, recognizing to show empathy, to meet people where they are, would you agree that this means that we need to acknowledge general feelings of being cheated because in favor of, favors going to others instead of them as justification for taking action for the regulatory solutions that we're advocating?
Yes. And, that was very good. And we should turn over this this webinar to her. You'll see how that's used in the very first narrative. But yeah, absolutely. You have to empathize with your audience so they understand that you're on their side, and that's what this does.
Great. Why don't we move into the next session, because I think some of the other stuff is linking directly to some of the narratives that you're going to present. So why don't we transition there, and we'll and we'll take questions at the end.
That's very good. So, how do we use this information? I mean, it all sounds very academic and theoretical, and what we're here for at PLI is to try to give you real tools that you can use in your daily political life. So the first thing is avoid talking about government as an abstraction and focus on talking about what government accomplishes. People are in favor of what government accomplishes. People will get the wrong, some people will get the wrong picture in their minds when you just talk about government or Washington or bureaucracy or welfare or any number of words that we lay out in our book, Voicing Our Values. So talk about what government does. You do not have to talk about, quote, government, unquote. Second, find examples of specific state and local enforcement failures where you can explain the problem and call for a specific enforcement solution. Now, this requires a little bit of research in your own state or locality, but if you can find something where you can say that, we have a law or policy or people understand that this is the way it's supposed to be, and it's not being enforced or it's not happening, and then you can use this language to support what you're doing, it's going to be wildly effective. Because if you can frame it this way, you get almost all the voters on your side, except some slice of the conservative base, but it just will get all the persuadable voters. So do some research, and I'll talk about this again in just a second. Third, use this language to create an overall theme for your current political efforts. So whatever those efforts are, you're saying that there are these serious problems to fix and that we can fix them, and in an optimistic way, that we can do it, the hope side of the discussion. And again, I think that Bernie Sanders has done a pretty good job of saying, yes, we can. And that's always a winner. Saying no, we can't is not a winner. Now, when you are looking for examples of specific state and local failures where you can use this language, understand that there's quite a variety of things that you can research. There's a large number of policy areas, and I've listed some of them here. We would be very interested in working with you to develop messages for specific enforcement policies and stories in your own states and localities. If you got something, tell us about it. We will help you construct that narrative, because we're interested in those examples. And not only do we have messaging expertise that we are happy to give, we also have access to experts in each of these areas who would be willing to assist in making this thing work. So bring us in. We'd really like to show that this messaging is an advantage to our side. Okay, so I'm going to show you two narratives. It's the thing in blue here. And one of them is a populist narrative, and the other is about protection and prevention. The first populist narrative, this is a test where in the poll, both of the paragraphs were read and people were asked which side they agreed with. And the first one there, you'll see, makes the whole point that the system's often rigged to favor the wealthy and powerful, over average Americans, or big businesses over small businesses. That kind of populist language that puts us side by side with the listener, who is feeling the same way, according to lots of polls. And then you can argue for better enforcement. And you see here, if you look at what's described as enforcement, whether prohibiting big banks from destroying our economy, stopping the credit card industry from charging hidden fees, or preventing the wealthiest 1% from hiding billions of tax dollars in offshore tax havens, we need stronger, more just enforcement of our laws and regulations. Okay, now look at those. Each one of those, prohibiting big banks from destroying our economy, stopping credit card industry, and so forth, those could be new regulations or they could be new laws. Americans don't know the difference. It could be an existing regulations not being enforced or not. This idea of linking it to enforcement of laws and regulations allows us to apply this concept, this narrative, to an awful lot of things. And here's the amazing thing. The opponent's message that's listed here, and again, you'll have access to these slides. You don't have to write them down. You'll have this comparison to use yourself. The opponent's message is a good one. This conservative message usually wins. The conservative message is very powerful. It usually wins. But in this case, the populist message won 80-16. Which is just remarkable. 80-16 means that it got all of our side, it got all of the persuadables, and it even got some of the conservatives, some of the people in the conservative base. And only 16%, which is only a slice of the conservative base, sided with the conservative message. It's just amazing how this thing worked. Now, there's another way to do it, and it's not about populism, but it's about safeguarding our lives and health and so forth. And this also could be enforcing regulations that are in the book, or it could be creating new regulations, or it could be writing new laws. Americans really don't know the difference anyway. In this case, against the same conservative message, it wins 75-21. Normally, I would say that's unbelievable and you couldn't do better, but the previous one won 80-16. So I would say that either one of them works, but the populist message works better. Here's after the simulated debate, 80-16 versus 75-21, and here it is broken down by Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. So the populist message obviously works a little better with Democrats, and overall it works better with Republicans and Independents. But if you look at the blue, the blue is people who believe it strongly, versus the green is people that believe it, agree with it, but less strongly. You see that interesting 61% of independents who feel strongly about the prevention message. So what I would say in choosing between the two is that if you're trying to, traditionally, you're trying to both persuade independents and capture Democratic base, or progressive base really, that the populist message is going to work better. But if you're really focused on independents, the prevention message is probably better because it's got more intensity. I thought that was very interesting in this poll, but basically either one of these messages is going to work for you. Now, I'm not going to go over this in great detail because you're going to have access to the slides. This shows the matchup between the messages, and you'll be able to, study it. So that was the populism, and this is the protection argument. You'll be able to study this if you want to. You'll be able to download it. So, why do voters care? What is it that's motivating them? What are they feeling? Voters believe that enforcement of laws and regulations can be most effective when preventing deadly mistakes, protecting seniors and children, reducing pollution, holding big business accountable, and that there's a critical role for enforcement of regulations in a number of areas of American life. Voters are concerned that laws are not equally or fairly applied. That's what they're thinking. But always, always you have to keep in mind that they don't want to hurt small businesses. Again, you know, there's just a lot of information here that you can look at on your own. Basically, it just shows how if you can talk about a problem that's about deadly mistakes, saving lives, protecting seniors and children, and so forth, that it's the very strongest, where if you get down here to, you know, regulating markets, creating a level playing field, or mentioning small business at all, then you lose favorability. Still works, though. Still works. The top priorities for enforcement, that is, you know, what kinds of things. Strong majorities believe it's important for clean water, food, drugs, and also to regulate government officials. Here are the priorities by, you know, specific policies. So clean water is the strongest, food and drugs is very strong, and so forth. Again, you can look at all of this polling information by downloading. The final thing I want to say before we run out of time here is that communication through storytelling has been shown to be remarkably effective, and that this is kind of a new approach. You know, we've been talking about storytelling in message framing for some time, but this poll really shows how overwhelmingly effective it is if you can boil your story down into some kind of case study. The best arguments revolve around case studies where lives or great sums of money are lost as a result of bad enforcement. The case studies make it painfully clear that failing to enforce our laws and regulations is very costly. In addition, Americans will prioritize messages that emphasize how lives and dollars can be saved with proactive enforcement, as well as a message that, you know, is against like wage theft or criminal penalties for CEOs who are found guilty. Voters are less moved, they're still moved, but they're less moved by the arguments that don't have these kinds of storytelling specifics. So generally about, you know, the 1% and cracking down on Wall Street and everything, that's pretty effective, but this is more effective than that. Now there were, these specific case studies were tested, and you'll have access to the actual narratives that were tested. But the point I want to make is, look at these numbers. You can't do better than this. This is, on the first one, this is the West Virginia case where in Charleston a chemical was released into the water, and, you know, it was a disaster for everyone. When you tell the story, 90% of people found it convincing, and 70% found it very convincing. It was tremendously effective in arguing for an activist government, because they could see from the story that there was no other way to make sure that this thing didn't happen in their own city or town. Another example here is the West Texas case that was like 3 years ago, where you know, there was this gigantic explosion. So here are the first three of these little narratives. In other words, you read this, you tell people this kind of information, and that they find it to be very effective, even though it's like only 3 sentences each. So what can you do with these stories? I'm going to give you 2 more slides that you can read, because there's no point in trying to get them through a webinar. What can you do with these stories? If you're talking about government activism, regulation, and enforcement generally, so you're just trying to make the general argument, then use these stories. These are great stories, and I would add to that Flint, Michigan, which is also a great story where people will pretty quickly agree that rules and regulations were not applied. The government didn't do the right thing because it was Flint, because it was people who were not politically powerful, because the population was not the supporters of the state government. But if you're trying to apply this research to your own state or locality, then think about what you can say, what stories you can find in your own state or locality, and there have to be stories. They may be obscure now, but you can find the stories and build them into something that people will remember. What stories can you tell that you can tell them like this in 3 sentences and get it across so that people understand the importance of an activist government? And then, you know, how can you use that to get that government activism, that the rules, regulations, and enforcement to fix it? The final thing I'm going to show you, and again, this is something that is just too much text for me to read for you, but this is a messaging triangle, and it shows how you would use, how you would interact with people about this topic, expanded enforcement, so that you've got 3 pieces that you're putting across. One is the negative piece about how awful things were when this happened in West Virginia or West Texas or wherever. The piece with success stories about how government activism saved people or made things better, and the argument at the bottom where you're giving the need for increased enforcement, that people are all ready to buy. They're there if you just say it. So if you're engaged in a conversation and you're trying to put this across, you keep these 3 things in mind, and you're using one after the other to reinforce the overall narrative about how enforcement of laws, regulations, rules, and so forth benefit people's lives in a real way, and that they will appreciate and favor it. So that's my last opportunity here. Let's see if there are any more questions.
And this will be the last time to ask some questions. And Bernie's presented a wealth of information, and like you mentioned earlier, for those who joined us a little bit later, all of the slides and data that was presented in this new research talking about how the public embraces government taking action through regulations and regulatory agencies to improve people's lives is popular. It's going to be available on our website, and everyone who's joined this session will be emailed all that information as well. But if you do have any questions, or you have audio if you have audio capability, please click on the raise your hand icon on your control panel, or type questions in the question bar, and we'll take the last few questions that we have here. Bernie, we have a question from Melanie from Michigan, councilwoman in Michigan, asking a question of, are there positive messages or stories as it relates to infrastructure investment? You ran through a bunch of stories, and I was trying to read as many as I possibly could on the screen as well. Using that message triangle that you talked about, certainly when infrastructure collapses, and there's no shortage of that, or specifically as it relates to, maybe like public transit, do you have some examples in where positive messages and stories around infrastructure investment, problems by not investing, clearly it can work, justification for that level of investment.
I do not see that as one of the narratives that were tested, but infrastructure was absolutely one of the things that that polled very favorably, and people absolutely see infrastructure as one of the key things that they want government to provide. So I'm sure it would work. I'm sure it would work, but if the councilwoman or supervisor has a particular example, like a bridge falling down or a bridge that needs to be kept from falling down or something like that, we would love to work with her to create a narrative that works as best as it can.
Absolutely. I think it's really important. I mean, just to stress that as well-meaning to collect this information and share it with the world. We really want to be putting this stuff into action and working in partnership with you and your respective local communities and states to show how this can work best and put it into action. So aside from trying to just present all this information out there, we hope that there's a give and take that comes as a result of this this session. To reach out, you can email me at dwoodward@publicleadershipinstitute.org, and we can figure out and pull in a team of people together to really put this this newfound research into action in a way that helps move the needle in the direction of some of the solutions that we're looking for. Bill, wrote a question around the small business piece. Actually, there are a few people that are lifting up the small business issue, and I think, Bernie, in your presentation, talking about, like, in some of the research has showed that as soon as it presented as harm to that, weaker support, still very popular support. Bill posed a question that, in his experience, is that it's local government that's seen as the barrier to small business, and I think you think about zoning and planning and all of the regulatory actions that local government actively engages in. Is that true? And I don't want to be a kind of hating down, so and getting the federal government off the hook and blame the local government for these problems. Maybe reinforce the point that the public overwhelmingly wants their public leaders looking out for their interest, and that the straw man argument that this is going to hurt small business should not be the thing that holds us back from using this stuff.
Yeah, I would say that even though it is true that the federal government doesn't have a whole lot of direct negative impact upon businesses, that is where the conservatives use the argument overwhelmingly. And while the truth is that local government has the greatest impact on small business, that's just not the perception of the people in the conservative base. Nevertheless, let me say that we progressives tend to talk about the debate or the issue as being consumers against businesses, and this is not a good idea. What we should be for is the less powerful against the more powerful, and that includes, and we should explicitly say, that small businesses need government to level the playing field with big businesses. That too often small businesses get crushed by unfair tactics by big businesses, and that we're the ones that are on their sides. We just don't tend to talk about that so much because we're so focused on consumers and employees versus large corporations. But sticking up for small businesses is an important part of our philosophy and very important for our politics.
Great. Well said. Well, I think most of the questions we've gotten, actually I think all the questions we've gotten through. If there are any last minute questions, you can raise your hand or type questions on in the couple minutes that we have left here. I mean, I think that this is incredibly important. As we stated earlier, that we're going to make sure that all the research and data that's presented here is available to all of you. I mean, not only on our website, but emailed to all of you who are joining and participating. And we really do want to invite all of you to join us in putting this stuff into action. And working with Bernie and his team to really craft a narrative. I mean, experiment and demonstrate what works and what works best, so that we can share that knowledge with other champions around the country. So, Bernie, without any further ado, I want to say thank you so much. I think this has been incredibly helpful. Takes a somewhat nuanced and maybe wonky conversation, and I think you've presented it in such a way that gives us really concrete tools to put into action. So, thank you for presenting this, and thank you for Lake Research for gathering this, and the Bauman Foundation for funding it to bring this presentation to all of us today.
And, if you have any ideas to how to improve this presentation, just send us an email at leadership@publicleadershipinstitute.org. We really would like to know your reactions and what we could do better, and some slides are confusing and it's too much or it's too little, because we're going to give a version of this in states around the country, and your feedback now will help us a lot next month.
Absolutely. And I'm going to put that in the bottom here. Email leadership@publicleadershipinstitute.org, and we look forward to all that feedback. And who knows, we might be coming to a state near you, maybe your state. All right, thanks again, Bernie, and thank you everyone from around the country for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Dave.
All right, take care.